And I am
Welcome,
also
everybody.
turning the lobby off.
All right, cool. All right, welcome,
Oops.
everybody, to our workshop today on completing the work and activities section of your AMCAS or AACOMAS applications. So today I have a great crew with me to support. I have Dr. John Taborn, who will also be presenting half of this lecture today. So, John, you want to say hi to the folks or anything?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, Dr. Hill. I was saying goodbye to Dr. Hill, but I had my mic off earlier. I want to let you know that I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
All righty, and we have the director of the educational program, Dr. Brittany Hardy, if you want to chime in on anything.
Hi, everyone. Good to see y'all. If you have questions, please use the Q&A. I'm just typing that out in the chat now. Happy to see you all.
Awesome. And we have Dr. Gail Siebel, who helps out with pre-medical advising, but is the deputy director of the GPP program. So, Dr. Siebel, would you like to say hello to everybody today?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good to see you.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our workshop today, as some of you still trickle in. And so today we're going to be doing this workshop in two parts. I will be covering the first part on filling out the different boxes, selecting experience, writing your experiences as lists or narratives, splitting the experiences, as well as some common errors and some summaries. And then Dr. John Taborn will follow up with with a discussion on completing those most meaningful experiences for those of you who will be completing an AMCAS application and then combining experiences. So let's just jump right into this with the AMCAS work and activities section. So for those of you who are applying allopathic medicine, this is going to be the application that you're going to be using. And once you get to the experience section, this is what the screen is going to look like. And you're going to have a number of activities or experience types that you can select from the drop-down menu right here is indicated. And you see there a list of all the activities that you can select from, going from artistic endeavors to your clinical and non-clinical volunteering to hobbies to, physician shadowing, research, and teaching and tutoring. And so, based upon the experience that you're going to be filling in, please select the most appropriate experience type. And then you're going to move on to selecting or writing in or typing in specifically the experience name. So, what did you do through this experience? Were you a patient companion? Were you a transporter? Were you an EMT? Whatever you were doing, or whatever the name you want to give to the experience, go ahead and put it into this little box. And then next, you're going to select the start and end date for the experience. So if you did this in one lump sum where you spent like a year, like, I don't know, 4 hours a week for a whole year volunteering, you're going to put the start date of whenever that year began, the end date of whenever that year began, month and year, as well as the number of hours, right? And so you're going to complete the number of hours here. But let's say it's an experience that you did through the 4 years of your undergrad and you completed it during each summer after school, right? And so that's going to be an experience that probably repeats itself because you only did it for the 3 months of the summer. And so instead of putting the whole year or all 4 years into this top box, you're going to say that it repeated itself. And then you're going to have a drop-down box that I'm going to show you momentarily where you can put the additional start dates for each summer after your academic year. You're also going to have a slot to put your organization name. So if you were volunteering with Meals on Wheels, right? If you were volunteering at ICM Cares Clinic, wherever the experience is taking place at, the organization name, go ahead and slot it in there. And remember, for the AMCAS application, you can have up to 15 experiences that you can discuss. So going back to this repeat um, experience, one that you did, maybe, like I said before, after each year in undergrad, you can put your second, third, and fourth start dates here on this screen. along with the number of hours associated with each one of those repeats. Now, some of you are going to want to anticipate hours for future volunteering with certain experiences that you have on your list. And you can also do that. So you can select that you do want to anticipate doing, a future or having future involvement with the activity. And so go ahead and select yes, and then you're going to put your anticipated dates, right? And so remember, when you're putting these anticipated dates, you're going to start with the future start date, right? Because these are future hours that you're going to anticipate doing. So when do you anticipate getting those future hours? When is that going to start? And so the earliest it can start is the month that you submit your application. And then you can have an end date of, maybe 6 months down the line, maybe right before you matriculate into medical school would be your plan, right? And so select the corresponding months and years accordingly, and then think about the number of hours that you're going to anticipate, right? And so you want to be realistic in the number of hours that you're going to anticipate. How many hours can you get completed in the next year? And keep in mind that potentially you're going to be going out for interviews and doing, your lab research at the NIH. And so these are going to be hours that you won't be able to spend volunteering. So make sure that you're being realistic about the anticipated number of hours that you're going to spend in whatever activity you're anticipating continuing to do through the cycle. Okay, so for those of you who are applying AACOMAS, so osteopathic medicine, so if you're applying for AACOMAS, you're going to have an experience section just like you do on the AMCAS, but it looks a little bit different. And so what you're going to see here is when you select add an experience, you're going to get a list of experiences that you can select from. And your experience selection is a bit shorter than the AMCAS experience, which is okay. You're going to be able to select from, extracurricular, health-related experiences, non-health related employment, research, teaching, and community enrichment, right? And so once you select what type of experience it is, you're going to complete the drop box that comes up. So the experience name, you may consider ICMS Cares, Clinic Transporter, Meals on Wheels Volunteer, whatever the experience name that you want to list there, please fill it in. And then you're going to select whether you got paid, were you compensated for this activity? Did you receive academic credit, so something that you used to complete some of your undergraduate coursework, or were you a volunteer, unpaid experience, right? And unlike the AMCAS, where you're going to select a month and a year, here you're going to put the number or average number of hours you worked per week, right? And then you're going to put the number of weeks that you were involved in this activity. And the system or the application system is going to determine the number of hours that you get through simple multiplication, of course. And then you're going to be able to complete your experience discussion and then tell AACOMAS whether or not you're going to allow them to connect or contact the organization that you're describing in this activity. And for those of you applying osteopathic medicine through AACOMAS, you'll have unlimited number of experience that you can discuss. Okay, now for AACOMAS, you're also going to have an achievement section. And this is right below the experiences. And similar to the experiences, you're going to have an add achievement box that you're going to be able to select. And then you're going to select from the drop-down box one of these types of achievements that you may have, right? And so you're going to put the achievement name. Was it a presentation you presented? You had an oral presentation at I don't know, at the NIH poster day or 3-minute talk competition. And then you're going to tell, the organization that gave you the recognition, right? Where did you present this poster at? The NIH. Or maybe you presented it at a conference like the Society of Investigative Dermatology. Wherever were awarded this recognition to present your work, you're going to tell AACOMAS that information as well. You're going to select the issue date, so when did you give the presentation, and then you're going to discuss your experience. Alrighty, now that we've gotten through filling in the individual boxes based upon the two application systems, let's think about the experience types that you really want to, kind of like the must-have experience types that you want to make sure that you're including on your application. And those are the clinical volunteering, non-clinical volunteering, leadership, clinical observation, and research. And then our office also suggests that you consider having an artistic endeavor and or hobby as one of your experiences. But of course, you get to decide for AMCAS which of the 15 experiences you want to include that you've been involved in. And for those of you who are applying AACOMAS, you get to decide how many experiences you want to include and what it is you want to talk about, what you want to show the admissions committee. So when you're thinking about crafting these experiences, think about maybe starting off with a list of the experiences that are important to you, right? So think about what's important to you. Where did you have that most growth? Learn the most, that were the most significant to you for whatever reason, right? And think about what information you want to share with admissions. And remember who's on the committee. Those are physicians that you're going to be talking to. And in some cases, there may be a medical student or two from the upperclassmen who will also be evaluating your application. And for those of you applying MD, PhD, you're going to have a scientist on your committee or multiple scientists on your committee evaluating your experiences. So remember who you're writing to and what information you want these individuals to know. And then you're going to describe your role in the experience. What did you do? And then what you learned from the experience in 700 characters for AMCAS. And for those of you applying to AACOMAS, you have 600 characters to describe this in. So for those of you applying AMCAS, you're going to have the option to select 3 of your experiences as most meaningful. Now, this is only for AMCAS. AACOMAS applicants, you will not have a most meaningful section. So you will be given unlimited experiences up to 600 characters only. Okay? And then keep in mind that not all of the experiences require this full narrative description. Actually, there's some experience that actually lend themselves better to a list. So what are those experiences? Well, maybe you'll consider listing the conferences you've attended, your awards and recognitions, your poster presentations or oral presentations, and your publications. So how might this look? Well, here we have an example of what maybe a conferences you attended experience may look like. And remember, again, this is 700 characters. You're going to probably list the year, the conference, and the location of the conference, right? And for your awards, you may list the year of the award. And if the award by its name is self-explanatory, then you could probably just list the award name. But if the award is not explanatory, like Senior Student Excellent Award, doesn't really mean much unless you tell us what it's for. And for most outstanding senior research thesis, right? And so give a brief description of what it is when the name of the award is a little bit more ambiguous. So when you're thinking of poster presentations or oral presentations, you're going to think of considering to use APA or LMA format to list these experiences. And remember, if you have multiple poster and or oral presentations, select the ones that are most meaningful to you to keep in your application. Unless, maybe they're all meaningful to you and you have unlimited experiences like you do in AACOMAS. But for those of you who are applying AMCAS, you're really going to have to select the ones that are most important to you so that you don't have multiple repeat experiences, like 5 or 6 experiences, just listing poster presentations. Alrighty, publications. Again, an experience where you're going to consider using APA or LMA format to really approach listing those different publications. And again, you may have 2 publications. One may be submitted and accepted for publication. One may be under revision, and you're welcome to denote that on your application. Just put, parentheses at the end and put in review so that your admissions committee who's evaluating your application can see, which stage your publication is actually in. Okay. So what experience lists themselves better as a narrative? Well, here we have a nice big long list of experiences that may be better as a narrative. One of them, the other experiences, is kind of ambiguous depending on what it is you're going to be putting under other. It may lend itself better to a list than a narrative, but that's going to be up to you to decide depending on the information you're going to be providing under an experience denoted as other. So when you're thinking about describing a narrative experience, think about briefly expressing or discussing your role in the activity. But please make your main focus of the description what you learned about the activity, the significance, the impact that this activity had on you, something about that personal growth. And if you have space, maybe include something about how it's going to help you in medical school, or as a physician. So, this is an example of a typical experience we see when we're reviewing the work and activities sections of trainees. So as a volunteer at organization, I have worked closely with underserved populations to promote health education and access to care. I assist with organizing free clinic screenings, distributing informational materials on chronic disease prevention, and facilitating communication between patients and healthcare providers. But what do you think is missing from this description? And so if you're thinking about what you learned as being the aspect that's missing, you're absolutely right. What was missing from this description is what you've learned, right? So through this experience, I've developed strong interpersonal skills, cultural competencies, and a deeper understanding of the social determinants of health. One of my most meaningful experiences involved helping a non-English speaking patient navigate available healthcare resources, reinforcing my commitment to patient advocacy. Right? So think about how you've grown, what you gained from these experiences, and make sure that you include that in your experience description or narrative. Okay, so for shadowing, this is an example of what we typically see when we see patient shadowing experiences. You have a physician's name, usually where they work at, what type of physician they are, some contact information, as well as the number of hours that you spent shadowing the individual physicians, right? And so how many of you are planning to use kind of a similar format for your shadowing? And so you can say, put a thumbs up in the chat or in the emoji section. And so for those of you who are thinking of using this format, let me give you a bit more information. While this does show that you spent quite a bit of time going out and doing some shadowing, it doesn't actually tell us what you learned from your observation, right? And so maybe think about considering to combine maybe some or all, if you can, of your shadowing experiences into one experience, And think about stating, the specialties and or the physician that that you shadowed, and describe what you learned about the role of a physician through your experience of shadowing. And make sure to include that unique role of a physician, that problem-solving aspect that comes with being a physician, right? What is unique about being a physician? Make sure you include that. So here we have an example. I shadowed an internist, Dr. Paul excuse me, a cardiologist, Dr. Judy Ace, a pediatrician, Dr. Andy Starr, and an oncologist, Dr. Tom Brown. I learned how physicians interpret test results, diagnose patients, and develop treatment plans tailored to lifestyle factors. This experience provided insight into the clinical reasoning, communication, and teamwork required in medicine. I also gained an understanding of how physicians balance empathy and efficiency in high-pressured environments. Observing a difficult diagnosis delivered with compassion highlighted the importance of emotional intelligence in patient care and strengthened my commitment to pursuing a career in medicine. Okay, so research. When you're thinking about writing your research activity, think about discussing it at a high level. Remember, you're not going to be talking to people who are experts in your specific real field of research. So keep it high level. Identify, the lab, the your PI, describe the overarching goal of the lab, discuss, this topic, discuss, the importance or rationale of that goal. Why is it important to do this field of research? Address the major questions or the work that you did towards this goal and tell us the significance. Why is it important? Your findings, what was important about your findings, the implication of those findings in this field of study, and then most importantly, think about how your research advances medicine. Show that you understand how medicine is fueled through research. And make sure to discuss that growth and what you learn through research in your experience description. And remember, when you think about writing about your research, methods and techniques are only needed if they're going to help you discuss the significance. If not, please don't list a bunch of techniques that you learned in the lab, like Western blot or qPCR or flow cytometry, just to show that you learned those experiences, right? Think about the things that you learned about medicine that are going to help you as a physician. Okay, leadership. So, leadership is another important experience to have. And again, you're going to want to have a brief description of your role in the activity as a leader, right? What did you do as as a leader in this role, right? What did you learn about leadership and the impact that leadership role had on you? What did that mean to you? How did you grow as leader? What skills did you develop through learning to be a leader, right? So think about that growth that you had through your role as a leader when you're talking about a leadership discussion. Excuse me. Alrighty. So now let's focus a little bit on splitting an activity, because some of you are going to have an activity where you have, a number of hours and, a part of the activity, maybe you had a leadership role, but the other part of the activity, you were maybe a volunteer or maybe you were an employee and you want to discuss them separately. And that's completely up to you to decide to do that. You do not have to split any of your experiences, but if you want to and it may benefit you, you may choose to do so. And so here's an example of a way to do that. So in this example, we have a experience where somebody was a volunteer at a community center that hosted events for the area. And their first 2 years in this activity, accounting for 200 hours, they specifically spent their time doing their volunteering role as a community member participating in the events, right? But the third year, they became involved in the coordinator of the community events. So this was more of a leadership role where they planned the events, organized the events, and that was their role in the volunteering. And they decided that they wanted to split these into two, keeping the 200 hours where they focused mostly on volunteering as a volunteering experience, but the 100 hours that they put into the leadership role of the activity, they kept that separately and listed under leadership. And an example or a way to do that, you can definitely do that. But what you need to remember is one, you need to split the hours. So in this case, the total number of hours for this community center volunteer was 300 hours, but they split the time that they were focused mostly on volunteering, the 200 hours, from the 100 hours that they did leadership roles, right? And so if you're going to do this, splitting an activity, make sure you split the hours, right? And then the discussion. So when you're discussing the volunteer role, you're going to discuss what you did as a volunteer and what you learned about serving a community at need. Then you're going to do the description for the leadership role, where you're going to describe what you did as a leader and describe what you learn about leadership and your role as a leader. Alrighty, so what are some common errors that we see in the work and activity? So creating multiple experiences for, multiple entries for repeated experiences, poorly written or not edited experiences, omitting, must-have activities like community service, putting forth a weak experience, having an experience with little to no completed hours, but many anticipated hours. So again, be realistic. If you spent 4 years in an activity and you've only completed 10 hours, don't estimate that you're going to spend the next year completing 500 hours in that activity. Be realistic in the time that you have and the number of hours that you're going to put forth, right? And then making an experience with very few hours a most meaningful experience. And so if you've only spent five, now there's a caveat here, because sometimes 5 to 10 hours is enough to explain or to have a most meaningful experience. But you need to explain why that is so significant. And Dr. Taborn is going to get into that in the next section. But many cases say that you were volunteering, for an example, in the hospital and you were stacking boxes, right? And you've only done 10 hours of this for the last 2 years, right? Now, highlighting stacking boxes as the most meaningful experience is probably not going to be the best option for you unless something really meaningful happened. And then you're going to have to talk about, those hours that you spent in that most meaningful where the impactful experience, you got to help deliver a baby, right? And maybe that was most meaningful. And maybe you spent 5 hours doing that, and that's why you want to make this the most meaningful. You need to tell the committee that so that they understand how that 10 hours equals something that's most meaningful, right? Because if your description is, I just stacked boxes, and you omit the whole part about being a part of this labor and delivery, the committee doesn't understand how that's most meaningful. So keep that in mind. And like I said, Dr. Taborn's going to get into that a bit more. And then again, overemphasizing the impact of an activity, right? But most importantly, what we mostly see in our office is failure to point out the significance or impact of an experience. We usually get activities where trainees have just explained what they've done with nothing about what they've learned. So make sure to put what you learned, why the experience is so significant, something about you in that experience. Okay, so in summary, be consistent. If you're going to list something in a list, be consistent in the style that you're going to list it in. If it's APA format, do APA. If it's LMA, do LMA. However you're going to list it, they need to be consistent. Narrative is fine. Narrative with the list, again, if you're going to have a list, be consistent with it. So narrative style allows you to describe and explain what you learned. Please make sure you explain what you learned from an experience. Publications, posters, awards, and conferences are great for lists. In your clinical experience, make sure you include what you learned about the medical profession, patient care, and the environment. In your research, big picture, the purpose, the future application, how how research advances medicine, right? And please leave out the jargon and acronyms that we are so well known for here at the NIH. Okay, non-clinical experience. Highlight what you learn that will be useful in both medical school and as a physician. Leadership, Think about what you learned and discuss your role as a leader. And then again, properly format and punctuate and edit your documents. All right, questions before Dr. Taborn gets started.
Yeah, hey Natasha. So we have a few questions in the chat. Oh, sorry, in the Q&A. So one question they were asking about if they had a shadowing experience in high school that really excited them about medicine. Is it okay if they include that in their personal statement? Can they include it in their working activities? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, great question. So, and I don't know if I mentioned it, maybe I forgot to mention it, but when you think about your MCAS activities and you're including hours, right? You cannot include any hours from work done in high school. Everything post high school graduation is fair game for hours for your experiences, okay? Now, when you think about including it as maybe part of a description of an activity, again, these are 700 characters, so that may not be the best place to include it. But if you want to, you could probably include maybe a sentence or two about it in your personal statement if it's that significant to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question on separating experiences. So this person said they have several different research experiences. Should they separate those into different experiences, or should they put them all in one?
So these, I'm assuming these are like an undergrad research experience, maybe a summer internship, and then like your NIH experience. So you would probably consider, depending on the significance of those or how similar they are to each other, probably keeping them all separate. Unless there's a way to combine them through similarity, which may be the case, and Dr. Taborn will discuss how to combine those momentarily. And then maybe we can revisit that question to kind of get a sense of your research experience, or maybe you can schedule an appointment with one of us so that we can take a look at what your research experiences were to tell you the best approach for your work and activities. But most of the time, what we see is each research experience that people have had, they've listed it as one. Now, if you're talking about multiple projects in the same lab, you can keep that all in one experience.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. And for everyone, to meet with one of the pre-med educational advisors, I put the link in the chat. Thank you. No more questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany. And Dr. Taborn, you're up.
Okay.
Do you want
Yeah,
control,
let's
or do
give
you
a
want
round
me
of
to move stuff?
applause to Dr. Hill for that wonderful beginning part of this very important workshop for you as you're getting ready to start working on your AMCAS and AACOMAS applications. I'd also thinking about some of the additional questions that are kind of related to what Dr. Hill's talking about. I'm going to talk about combining and most meaningful experience, combining experiences and also how to write, and some heads up, and not how to write, but also how to think about the most meaningful experiences today. And so can I advance these on my own? Let me see.
You're going to have to take control, John. Do you see that button?
Oh, let's see. 1 second, everybody. The button says, hold on, it says controls. Where's the button?
Here, let me see if I can find you real quick.
Sorry about that. I might have missed something that I was supposed to hit everybody. Well, let's see. Recording meeting info video.
Just tell me when to switch, John. We'll just do it that
You want
way.
to just do it that way? Okay. So first of all, again, thanks to Dr. Hill for talking about these experiences that we have before. As I get started, I want to revisit something that Dr. Hill, we can go to the next slide, Dr. Hill, if you don't mind. Okay. Before I get started talking about the most meaningful section, I want to reiterate and make sure that you heard what Dr. Hill, one of the things that Dr. Hill was saying is, when you're writing these, you want to think about who your audience is when you're writing your application for MD, DO, and also MD, PhD programs or any kind of combinations. Remember, it's going to be primarily physicians on the committees. It'll also be maybe some MD, PhDs, especially for MD, PhD programs, meaning they are people that, and the physicians are going to be not only teaching you in classrooms, but they will also hold a clinical appointment in the teaching hospital, where you may also be working with them on rotations to learn the skills and meet with patients. Also learning the research. There may also be some current students from one or both programs, alumni, and also some retired people that are giving back. And they're all listening for you as an applicant to not only explain the experiences that you have, but this is your opportunity to tell them why it's important for you to, why you're sharing it with them, and not leave it to them to assume. This is kind of within why this is a very exciting part of your application. So as mentioned, you have 15 experiences on the AMCAS and a variety of experiences more unlimited on the AACOMAS application. Note, what I would say is all of them can be meaningful and important to you, but for the AMCAS in particular, you have 3 experiences that are called most meaningful. And that means you get to decide what are the most meaningful experiences that you can describe a little bit more. Sometimes I describe these as shorter, medium, and the personal statements as your longer personal statement, but this really gives you the most meaningful experiences, gives you more opportunity to talk about an experience. And this is my suggestions today are going to be how you can maximize this. First thing to notice is that in general, of the 15 experiences, it's really divided into 2 sections. And this is where we see some students that are reapplying, or as they're getting ready to apply, they miss this. So we're calling your attention to it today. When you get to most meaningful and you select it, that means you have a first section that's 700 characters, which is similar to what the other general experiences are. And that's called experience description. 700 characters, and you're basically describing what you did in that experience, and you don't really have to go into what you learned or anything like that, but more what you did, the nature of that experience, and what that's going to be. Secondly, you have an additional 1,325 characters, and the word above it says most meaningful. And then I wrote down here, it says, this is your opportunity to summarize why you have selected this experience as one of your most meaningful. In your remarks, you might consider the transformative nature of the experience, the impact you made while engaging in this experience, and the personal growth you experienced as a result of your participation. In short, when I'm talking to students or applicants when you're applying, I have you think about 2 things. One is you want to split what you did in the experience with the most meaningful section. A lot of time, and secondly, under most meaningful, you're really writing how you grew, changed, or developed as a result of that role, and explaining it to your reader, the doctors, so they understand how you grew, changed, or developed, and also if you had an impact and why that's important to you. Some of these, it may be related to medicine, some might not. It might explain how you grew as a leader, or what you learned from different particular kind of community service or clinical experience, whatever you want it to be. But make sure that's what you have. You have a 700 to describe it, and then 13 to explain to the reader why it's most meaningful. And that's pretty exciting, because then you get to really go and explain a lot more. Okay, for the other ones, we recommend of the 700 characters to go ahead and write most of it, and then maybe, like Dr. Hill was saying, in the last sentence or something, you can explain to the reader what you learned or why it's meaningful you in one sentence, on the shorter ones. But for this one, you get an additional 1325. Okay, we can go to the next set. And then here are a couple tips from what we've learned and what we've seen here in our office when we're looking over and critiquing, that we want to give you heads up to right now. So you can kind of keep this in mind. Again, what I would say, as I mentioned, there's 1,325. Sometimes you can explain several ways that you grew, changed, or developed, gain insight, or gain clarity. Okay, rather than one. Sometimes applicants, when you read through it, you might, as you see in the third bullet here, sometimes applicants start writing the experience description and then use the extra 1,350 characters to keep explaining what you did in the workshop, or explaining what you did in that experience. And then maybe one sentence that said, I learned how to be a strong researcher. That doesn't say a lot. Well, what happens is you kind of did not do yourself the benefit of explaining to the reader, to the reader of your application, the doctors and the committees that are reading these, how it's most meaningful. Explain several ways in the 1325. So use the 700 for that. And then in there, instead of saying the one thing I learned, say, here are several things that I learned and several ways that I developed as a result. And that's a good thing. Also, in this 15 in the three most meaningful, they really can be any type of experience. You can really choose any one of those experience types. The one that I usually suggest, or we suggest because it's medical, is to have one that's related to clinical or shadowing, because then you get an opportunity, because you're applying to med school, to explain how you grew, changed, or developed as a result of a patient care or medically related experience. If you don't do that, they kind of have to read for it, but this one you get a more opportunity to do it. You don't have to, but it's a strong suggestion. Okay. Also, as I just mentioned, instead of talking about one thing that you learned that makes it meaningful, talk about several. Another thing is, when you saw in the recent, most recent thing, it said talk about the impact of that you had as a result of this experience, like saying when you started or led a nonprofit or a student organization. A lot of times when it says most meaningful, an applicant might write mostly how it was meaningful to the recipients of your community service activity. And you spent saying that as a result of this, the participants got this, the participant got that. They grew. That's important, but I would say that's one thing that was a benefit of your leadership or your impact, but also use the time to explain to the reader how it was meaningful to you, how you grew. Even if you want to say when it was meaningful to me because I wanted to have an opportunity to give back to a community and see them grow, that's still, and then in those ways is explaining how it was meaningful to you, and more in addition to how it's meaningful to the community. So that's something to think about. Again, don't leave your reader guessing, meaning some people will write everything out, like we say in the 15 experiences. It's a little bit, because I'm a career counselor, a little bit like a resume. I did this, I did that, I accomplished this, I accomplished that. But you kind of leave the medical school reader saying, so does this applicant, for example, myself or Natasha, what do they want us to know about how this is meaningful? We don't want to interpret that. We'd rather have you, the applicant, tell us. And that's what we hear a lot from the physicians on the committees. Also, many of you might want to choose, and I've seen this, to tell a story. And when it says most meaningful, and you'll start telling a story about a patient that you saw, or a clinical experience, or an example of someone that the person tutored. And then the idea is, do I show or tell? And I'm a person that leans more on a both and, with telling the reader, the doctors, what you want them to know about that story. If you just write the story, you're leaving them to assume, oh, this person is strong, they exhibited leadership skills, they did that. Better is if you say, this is what I did, and then this is how I developed as a leader in this way. Or I really developed more of my confidence in patient care and establishing rapport with patients through this, rather than having them assume it. Oftentimes they won't. Many times they stop and say, what does this person want us to know? This is your opportunity. So again, with these most meaningful, you can use that. And as I mentioned before, not all of them have to have a link to medicine. If it's something that's important to you, well, like you were on a sports team or something and you really grew, that's fine. But sometimes, remember, medical doctors work in teams, and it might be something that makes you think about how you can use your teamwork approach and philosophy to add to the field of medicine. Okay, those are some suggestions. So I'll come and answer questions at the end of this in a moment, but I think I just saw a good one. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's an example. These aren't the best all-around examples, but it gives you an idea. So again, you'll have an experience type of community service, medical, clinical. And your name is, I would say, like Dr. Hill said, you can use one or a variety of roles or positions that you had to call attention to that role that you had in that experience type. So nursing, rehabilitation, care. And then here's an example. In this role, I work one-on-one with patients of various backgrounds who are admitted to a transition care facility. I care for patients with knee or hip replacements, amputees, shoulder care, and also long-term care residents. On a typical day, I greet patients, take their blood pressure, weight, and inquire about their symptoms and their health. As part of the care team, I offer my observations, help nurses with treatments and coordination of care. One female patient said that she felt comfortable sharing her healthcare needs with me as a female of color and a mom from a similar culture, which was encouraging for me. So the main thing I note with this experience, then we'll go on to the meaningful part, is this is just the first 700 characters. You notice they didn't go into, this is how it was meaningful, this is how I grew, developed, or changed. It's basically explaining in clinical, this is a good example you might use for when you're talking about, you're telling the physicians that you have some experience providing care in a way similar to physicians. They took blood pressures, they took weight, they learned what it was like to be part of the team. They show that the impact of their establishing rapport and their relationship with the patient. They also talked about what they did with the patient. This is all great. Let's go to the next slide to see why it's most meaningful. Okay, so from that, what we said, this is how you can expand it out. Okay, and it doesn't have to be 1,325 characters. This one's a little shorter, but it gets the point. Working in this role or as a nurse confirmed for me that I have communication skills to establish meaningful and trusting caregiver-patient relationships, the ability to practice patients and gain trust in my patients, and also the team to collect and discuss pertinent healthcare information. Do you see how you're telling the reader this? You confirm, Marie, that you have the communication skills as well as the ability to gain the trust of your patients and work with the healthcare team. It also communicates that I really learned that I enjoy working as part of a team, healthcare team, while I see that the importance of each profession in patient care is a physician that I desire to become. I'm excited to develop the clinical insights and skills to provide holistic care, including diagnosis, treatment planning, and leadership of a patient's care. I also learned the importance of culture and shared experiences in patient care. You see, you're really getting across, instead of going on and explaining more and telling a story about the patient you saw, you're telling the reader more about why this is meaningful and how you grew, so they understand and can say, this person really has an understanding of what we do in the healthcare and patient care. Let's invite this person to come in for an interview. I'd like to hear more about their variety of experiences. So that's an example of how you can kind of really use that additional 1,325 characters. Okay, let's go on to the next example. So with that experience, we'll go on to a little more discussion about combining experiences. Dr. Hill did a nice job of talking about several experience types that you might naturally combine and you might use as a list. And she mentioned that in her previous part of the presentation. But there might be a couple other things that you want to combine. When you're thinking about combining, a lot of times it can be beneficial. The goal is not to combine everything always into one section, like one section on shadowing or other. If it is important to use two sections or two experience types to do it, that's fine. Just make sure that in case you have like 4 or 5 shadowing experiences, you can't combine them all into one. You might need to use two. Whatever, you want to think about what it means when you're getting ready to combine something. So one thing we say is combining can be useful to save space, allowing you to include more experiences under one of your 15 experience types. But here's a couple of tips to think about. When you're thinking about what you want to if you want to combine two experiences together, you want to think about combining things that are similar experience types. Like if you want to combine two or three shadowing experiences, you would, like Dr. Hill gave some examples earlier, at least you have it under shadowing, and then you could have a contact person and write the type of doctor you shadowed and what you learned, but you're doing it 3 times. So the reader looking at that knows that you're going to have several things under shadowing. Sometimes it helps if you have several experiences that you want to combine, but you have few hours for each one. So this is an example that I've been hearing every once in a while. Like I didn't include several examples from my community service because they felt like one-offs to me. I did 1 8-hour here, I did 1 10-hour there, did 1 12-hour there. So I'm not going to include them. Better for your application is that medical doctors do, and they want to see if you've provided community service. Perhaps it's better to put community service, not medical clinical, and combine them together. So, and then when you combine them together, you have 8, 15, and 20 together will come together to almost 40 hours, and then you combine them together. And then you can also, when you combine them together, write the name of the experience, write the name of the place that you did it, and write a brief of your 700 characters, a brief description of what you did in that service, and do one for each one of those, and then what community service means to you. That's a good use of it. That's another idea of how you can use that. When you do this, you want to make sure that each experience is clearly identified. You don't want to kind of bunch them all together. You can use the contact information in the contact information section of your experience. You can use the information for one person that can either vouch for both or more one of the experiences, or the one that had the most hours. So, but in case they want to contact them, but you can also use the contact person for the other. Be sure to explain the most important information from each experience. You don't have to tell a story for each one. Make sure they get what you did in that experience. And again, explain your takeaway or what you've learned or why it's important, so the reader gets that. Publications, people combine together like Dr. Hill shared, and we recommended that you use the APA style or the other style that Dr. Hill recommended. Usually for publications, you would use ones that are published already or have been submitted for publications. If they're articles in preparation, you might choose to include that in your discussion of the research, and or have your PI mention it, or whoever your PI has mentioned that publication in their letter of recommendation, or even more in your research discussion. And then presentations, similarly, you can do that too. Let's go to the next, as Dr. Hill mentioned, we can go to the next slide. So here's an example of combining under leadership. So what I did is with this one, you can look at, for one role, you were president, and for another role, you were director, but the experience type that's in common is leadership. And then your contact name might be one person who can speak for both. When I look at this and see you were president of something, Pre-Med Stars and Pre-Med Pals, it might be the person that was over undergraduate leadership events at your university, or the advisor for those that you could have contact if they want you to verify, just vouch that you did it. And then in the write-up part of the 700 characters, the first one, you could do president, University of X Pre-Med Stars, and then you write what you did. I led, because you're using the leadership, efforts to expose pre-meds to this. I established the first collaboration, recruited MDs, DOs, and alumni to discuss medical school applications. And the next one, you go to trainer leader, which is another one. I developed training manual for 10 undergraduates a year to provide online dormitory outreach programs, facility channels of interest, refer to campus organizations. I build confidence establishing new initiatives, securing funding and skills in leadership training and long-term planning. So the one thing I would say is, with this example, under the president one of Pre-Med Stars, I think I'd add one sentence that says something about how you developed as a leader. Because leadership is not just to say you've led, is to give the reader, your doctoral listeners, and you, to say, I have a strong foundation in understanding myself as a leader, which I can build upon and develop into being a leader in medicine. And so it's not just say I've led, it's for you to say, this is what I think my strengths are. So the second one, it says you built confidence establishing new initiatives. You could have said it both for the first one as well. So this is an example of how to combine two together, and then you would also combine the hours together for that example. And then that gets you to get 2 leadership experiences. The reality is you might not be able to get all of everything into your 15 experiences. Remember, there are secondaries that come up where you can add experiences. There might even be a question on some of the secondaries. Is there any other experiences that is not in your original application you wish to add? And you can add some there. But you want to get some of your best examples in your 15, so that goes to all the schools. Okay. And let's go on to the next slide. I believe this is on here. I'm just going to go and talk about it. I'm going to answer some questions. Well, before we talk about this part, let's see if you have any questions about how to combine things together, or also how to the most meaningful sections. Are there any questions that we have?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, John. So, someone asked, so for research experiences or volunteer experiences, how important is it to emphasize the outcomes in the experience description / most meaningful? For example, if I have a poster presentation, can I only list it in the presentation section, or should I put it in the description of the corresponding most meaningful for the research?
Okay.
I talk about the reflection there.
Okay, I have a couple different perspectives on that, but I'll make them short. And then when you start doing this is why we invite you to make an appointment or talk with one of us during Q&A sessions on your own particular application for each one of you. But first thought is, in the idea of combining and maximizing your number of entries and space that you have, under the publications part, is the suggestion, by the way, it would be 0 hours because you can't really estimate the number of hours you have for publications. But it's what we're recommending is there are applicants that'll write about their research and what the publication and thesis is, but that's really best talked about under your research section. The publication would just be the publication, the authors, the title, the date, the journal, and the pages, and then go to the next one. So you can list all your publications in one section. That's the easiest and the place that the medical doctors and people reviewing your application look for publications. It's a little difficult to kind of find them written into the research part. It's easiest to find them there. Same for presentations. If you're going to talk about the thesis or the nature of the publication, best to talk about that in your research section briefly. The only other place I can think about that you could talk about your research outcomes, not only other, but one of the other good space to talk about it, is if you're an MD PhD applicant, because there's the personal statement that I'm talking about tomorrow, we have been talking about, which is the 10,000 characters to talk about your research. And that's where you really can go into more detail about the research question, the methods, the research question, the methods, the results, and the application of the results. And at the end of that, you can say you presented and published, where you have more of a paragraph to say more about it. So you don't have to take up as much space in your 15 experiences. So I realize it's a little confusing, but I try to keep it separate. I'm just going to talk about the publication and not do an annotated description of it, because, in the present publication section. And that should help you. That's a suggestion. Okay.
Thank you, John. One other question that we got, I don't think that John or Natasha went over today, but I think Natasha may be talking about in the filling out your AMCAS or AACOMAS application is what 3 types of experience people should pick for most meaningful. So we suggest picking a clinical experience, whether that's shadowing or volunteering, or if you have a clinical job. We do suggest picking one of your research experiences, so maybe here at NIH, or if you did undergraduate research. And then your third most meaningful, community service, leadership, TAing. We've even had people that, they were a division athlete in college, so they picked their sport, study abroad, whatever you want for your third. So I think Dr. Hill is going to go over that in our next webinar. Okay, cool. So let me see. I think that was it for the question. So I think we're good to go.
Awesome.
Okay.
So then,
Dr. Hill, did you want to go over these last few slides, or?
sure, I can do it.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, and we're looking forward to working with you.
Awesome. So thank you all. So a couple more reminders, like Dr. Hardy just mentioned, I will be giving a presentation next month on April 15th about completing the full length of the application. So that's both AMCAS and AACOMAS. So please join us for that. And she's absolutely correct. In that presentation, I tell you what we suggest to select for your most meaningful. But again, like Dr. Taborn said, this is your application. That is completely up to you what you suggest, what you select for most meaningful. Okay. Now, after that, in June, Dr. Hardy will be presenting on your secondary applications. In July, I will present on interviewing. And then way down the line in August, we'll start opening up our mock interviews. So some things to look forward for in the future. For those of you interested in asking specific questions about or general questions about the application, please join us on every other Friday. I believe our next one is next Friday, which is the 3rd of April, will be our MD, PhD question and answer session. Or you can find an appointment. There are several appointments online that are available for one-on-one with one of the advisors. We have the pre-med advisors listed there that you can schedule a one-on-one appointment with. And we put appointments in the system the 15th and the last day of every month. Alrighty, so this is a very busy, very stressful time. So please develop and maintain your well-being, your wellness. And we have a lot of resources for you. So please take advantage of those resources as you need them. And then for those of you trying to explore where you're at, where you're going, what you need, please consider using Finder, which is a new tool available through the OITE website. So go in there and start planning your futures. And I think we've gone over all of the questions. So if there's any
Nope.
last minute questions for either myself or Dr. Taborn, or Dr.
We
Hardy,
do.
looks like she has something.
Yep, we do have a question. So I think they were saying I mentioned study abroad. So like for people that have had a study abroad experience, should that be listed as an activity, or is there a section to put that under educational experiences?
So under educational experiences, you'll be able to list the courses associated with the study abroad. And they're also going to be listed on your institute transcript. But when you're talking about the experience, what you gained, what you learned about the experience, you can select the other experience to list that study abroad under.
Thank you. There were also several questions about, I think I answered them all, but there were also several questions about like the number of hours. Can you include hours from high school?
So once again, no, you cannot include hours from high school. Any hours post graduating from high school, so that summer before you started college, are fair game. You can include those on your application, but anything before you graduated is not acceptable for the MCAS.
Thank you. We're good to go.
Alrighty, so we'll get these slides to you soon, along with the recording. And again, thank you all for joining us today. We're very happy that you could be here, and please look out for our next presentation with more details about your application. Take care. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, have a good afternoon. We'll
Bye,
see you soon.
everybody.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. I'm ending the event.